Hi, this is Louis van Niekerk, and I've subsequently decided that this range is going to be called To Be or Not to Be a Paragliding Pilot. So, having been up the mountain, flown down, seen the excitement, I did what I do best, and that's starting to investigate the opportunity to become a pilot myself. And when you type in becoming a paragliding pilot, you get all the paragliding schools, and then all the explanations of how to do it, what to do it. But amongst them was an article about how safe paragliding is. Now, that was in the back of my mind. How safe is this really? I've heard that life insurance companies places a load on your premium because you're now in a higher risk category. And so beyond that, I have a family, and I most certainly do not want to go and give my life away just for fun. So this was quite paramount to me in understanding, is this an avenue I should pursue, or isn't it? And this particular school had an article where they claimed the safety of paragliding is extremely safe. And they went as far as using two pieces of statistics, incorrectly so. I later pointed out to them. The statistics are that for every so many thousand people that drive, that is the number of fatalities. And then they use a study, I think, in Germany that says there are 33,000 pilots and the number of fatalities are less or equal than those in motor cars. I'm sure you spot the flaw. If you don't, I'll elaborate. You most certainly cannot take number of vehicles and number of fatalities associated to number of vehicles and then equate that to number of paragliding pilots and number of fatalities and say that that is an equal level of safety. Why not? Well, the number of vehicles and the time that they are actively driving is remarkably higher than the number of pilots and their active time of flying. So really the best way to equate safety is to find number of hours operational for vehicles and then number of hours operational for paragliding pilots. Conversely, the number of hours operational for motor vehicle drivers and number of hours operational for paragliding pilots. And then compare the fatalities, because you will soon see that the number of fatalities per hour operational is quite drastically higher for paragliding pilots. And so that is what I did, and I came across another article, and I'll put the links in the comments below, where someone had actually done exactly that analysis that I suggest. And not just for paragliding, it would appear that his sport of preference is either hang gliding or parasailing, one of those two. And so he came to the conclusion that paragliding is more risky than driving, most certainly. It is in a group of risks, and he comes up with a parameter where he compares it. He makes the conclusion that it's not as it's not as risky as base jumping, but then I think very few things are as risky as base jumping. And so that deterred me, to be honest. Having come across this article, which now very clearly spelled out that paragliding is not as safe as driving. We all know that driving is less safe than flying. And so I was starting to ask myself, is this a fool's errand? Is this something I should really consider? And then I did a deep dive on Google, like a really, really deep dive. And if I say I read just about as deep as the Association of Paragliders in the United States and the number of accidents and the incident reports of those accidents, I even came across an article of a coroner in the UK that wrote to the Association of Paragliders after having investigated a number of paragliding associated deaths on his view, having done interviews with witnesses and other pilots and related parties associated to this death, he wrote to the Paragliding Association, and he made it quite an official letter where he asked them to respond and asked them to make adjustments to the regulations in the sport. And his conclusion was something to do with shifting your weight, which I'm starting to understand the importance of, and the importance of training schools emphasizing this, particularly in training, etc. So it gives you an indication of how deep I went into my deep dive. But there was one specific article which resonated with me. Let me put it that way. And I think the resonance is because it just makes a whole lot of sense. This guy did a similar deep dive to me and then eventually wrote this up and said his conclusion is that most of the fatalities are associated to bad decisions. Now that doesn't sound like rocket science at all. Until you get behind his logic, he's saying that pilots that make good decisions will not die. It's just pretty much almost as linear as that. Unless there's a freakish accident or something strange happens, if you make the right decisions, it becomes very safe. Much like fixed wing flying. It becomes very safe. But he's saying that if you're going to make 99% of the time good decisions, your risk of making a bad decision drops dramatically. Okay. In fact, your risk of dying because you're making such good decisions drops dramatically. What he is then continuing to say, and this is the important bit, is that you find people who will make a bad decision. Perhaps for his skill level, it's not the right time to fly. His equipment and his skill isn't good enough to fly on a particular day, but he decides to fly anyway. And it comes off. He has a great day, flies fantastically, very exhilarating, and gets to the bottom and gets rewarded at a psychological level for the risk that he took. Okay. Now, rather than making a mental note and saying, you know what, I got away with this one, I made a bad decision, I shouldn't have flown, that particular individual recalibrates his own decision making so that next time he, in a similar situation, makes the decision to fly again. Now, what happens is that this guy now no longer makes good decisions 99% of the time. He now makes good decisions 98% of the time, until he comes across another situation where he makes the decision to fly where he shouldn't have. Again, gets away with it, gets rewarded for a nice flight, and recalibrates himself so that systematically the quality of his decision making is just dropping. He's essentially pushing the envelope, and every time he pushes the envelope, he gets away with it. Except that paragliding isn't a very forgiving sport. You know, I did adventure motorcycling at quite an advanced level at some point. And if in adventure motorcycling you push the envelope and it goes bad on you, you're going to have a hard fall and maybe you'll break a couple of bones. But your likelihood of dying is low, particularly because you're at low speeds and the stuff that you do doesn't necessarily always translate into death. In paragliding, however, if you're going to push the envelope and make bad decisions, the punishment can be quite severe. You are in all likelihood going to pay with your life. And so with this knowledge, I went into a phase where I started phoning paragliding schools, hunting down people with extreme experience, people with 20 plus years of experience. And I started probing them with questions. And independent of each other, I wanted to see what their view is. And one of those questions were always, why is it that I read in the papers about fatalities? And why is it that I read about advanced pilots, people with a lot of experience, people with a lot of skill? Why is it that I hear that they also die? And one after the other, the answer that I got was practically what I read in that article, just framed quite differently. One guy explained to me that you can, in paragliding, after becoming a basic pilot, you probably will reach a fork in the road where if you go in the one direction, you are thrill seeking, and you are increasingly going to try and get better skills, get canopies and wings that are of a different grade, not as stable, not as forgiving, but matching your skill level, and it will give you more agility, more ability to do all sorts of things in the air, which for the thrill seeker is the direction. And that puts you in the sports class. Eventually you reach competitions up to the world championships. The other leg in the fork is where you remain recreational. You're there because you want to see the beauty and enjoy it, and possibly progress into cross-country flying, but always just recreational and for the sake of being in the air. And he pointed out to me that pretty much most of the fatalities of these advanced pilots, these highly skilled, highly experienced pilots, are in the sport pushing the envelope, thrill-seeking leg, and very rarely in the recreational or even cross-country leg. Not that there aren't risks in the cross-country leg, but essentially another pilot and trainer then put it to me differently. He said to me, if you stay within the envelope, you are always going to be safe. And that actually complemented what the guy who did my tandem flight, when I asked him about this, he said, for the first year, you should rely heavily on your instructor to tell you whether you should fly or not, because he will know, given your equipment, given your skill, and given your experience, whether today is a good time for you to fly. And that defines the envelope. And as long as you stay within the envelope of safety, very few things can go wrong, because you have a margin of error built into that, allowing you to get out of trouble given your equipment, given your skills, and given your experience. So in very harsh conditions, very skilled pilots with the right equipment, with lots of experience, will be able to get themselves out of trouble. Well, when a rookie wouldn't be. And the analogy with driving didn't go past me. When I learned to drive many years ago, I was a youngster. Firstly, I learned when I was 10, so I got the motor skills quite soon. But when I got onto the road legally, my father wouldn't allow me to drive at high speed between two towns. Low speed in town was fine, but high speed he didn't want to. He first wanted me to put in a couple of months locally. And I didn't quite understand it at the time. I most certainly do now. Because there's lots of things that happen at high speed. And reaction times aren't that fast. Decision making aren't that fast. Ability to assess a situation under pressure at high speed changes as you pick up experience and skill. And so I can do today at high speed much better than what someone who's just gotten their license recently or has only started driving recently would. And so I could draw the analogy in terms of the envelope from this feedback. And so at conclusion of this episode, I would say of to be or not to be. At the beginning, when I read about the fatalities, I pretty much put it out of my mind. I said, no, I don't think I want to try this. I don't think I want to become a pilot. I think there's just too much risk. It would be fun, but not at the cost that it would come at. And through the diligence of the process, I allowed myself to get to a place where I can, within acceptable boundaries, I can see that I can become a pilot. I also understand my personality and know that I'm not the thrill-seeking type. I'm actually rather cautious. I always say, whether it's financial investment, whether it is emotional investment, doesn't matter. I want to understand the risks. I want to manage the risks. And I want to know that the risks are acceptable. It doesn't mean that I don't take risks. Sometimes I take massive risks, but it's when I don't care if I lose, and if I don't care if it doesn't come off, because I've understood what will happen if it doesn't come off, and I've understood what I will lose if it doesn't come off. Probably at the extremity of the analogy is playing a one-arm bandit. When you put the coin in the machine, the odds of it actually paying out is quite low. So it's an acceptable risk. You understand what you're doing. It's a massively high risk that you will lose your money, but you're okay if you do lose it. If the one-arm bandit had a bullet facing at your face, I don't think anybody would do it. Or very few people would do it. I most certainly will not. And so my view of managing and understanding risks really is that. And it brought me, after doing all of this research, to a point where I said, I think it's an acceptable and manageable risk. Now I've got to go and acquire the skill and physically feel and actually get at a point where I might or might not launch, and then I'll assess the risk again. I might find as I go down this journey that I'm not comfortable with this risk. On paper it looks okay, but in practice it's not, and then I'll abandon ship. So I'll keep you posted. The next episode, I dip my toe in the water because of one of these instructors who said, listen, come around, I'll put you in a harness, I'll get you a feel, and we'll start the journey. And that's exactly what I did. If you know someone who wants to become a pilot with you and wants to follow this journey, why don't you share this video? And also remember to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when I post the next videos. Until then, thanks for watching.